Now, again, this is October 30th of 2022, and in the interest of doing some kind of a little somewhat, not really Halloween related, but just I'm going to actually review a fiction book for a change. This is Less Than Zero by Easton Ellis. And I haven't seen the movie by the same name, but this was the author that wrote American Psycho. And this, I mainly got this book because evidently the controversial part in this was that this is a really depressing book. It's basically about a rich kid that's like the child of Hollywood scriptwriter or something that's just has more money than they know what to do with, and just how depraved their lives are in his circle of friends. And sadly, this is very reminiscent of the behavior of some of the suburbs around Dallas, like Plano and Allen and Murphy. A lot of those kids are pretty well represented in this archetype here. Not near as wealthy. They'd like to think they're this wealthy, but a lot of the behavior is right on. Really dark subject in that, there's a soullessness to this about just this kid wandering through this landscape of the party scene in Beverly Hills, and just some of the things that they encounter, like finding a dead hobo, and really kind of getting off on just finding this body in an alley, and they're all going to take a look at it. So there's a really weird, macabre element to kids that have they've plumbed the depths of any kind of pleasure they can get out of regular life, and now they're looking to all kinds of other alternative sources of pleasure seeking, be it drugs and fascination with death and whatnot. And probably the most disturbing part of this is he talks about there's one scene in this. Of course, this is fiction, mind you, but there is a scene in here where he goes to a party where some of the kids are trying to get him to watch a snuff film, and he describes the first part of it in fairly realistic fashion that those of you who know about a little bit about that subject will know that whoever, him writing that, he at least knew enough to include to have a pretty good handle on that subject matter, which is really messed up. And a lot of people, because that, and I find this really interesting, snuff films are very much in, and the whole reason I ever started looking into that particular subject was there seems to be the same attitude towards snuff films as there is towards ritual abuse. And I find it very interesting that there seems to be this cultural prohibition against even discussion of such things as snuff films as even being a reality, even though anyone who is familiar with the things that people have filmed over the years knows that the idea of people filming the act of murder is not far-fetched at all. And then the idea of people profiting from that is definitely not far-fetched at all. So that particular scene is highly disturbing, but and the character wanders off before he sees the end of it. But and it's interesting that even within the framework of this fictional book, the other characters, having watched this horrible murder of two people, then are ribbing each other about it and trying to decide if it was real or not or whatever, and talking about how much they paid for it and that sort of thing. So that alone is a really interesting aspect of this, because I think this is one of those times where sometimes in fiction you have certain things emerge in this, and this is a really weird story to read because it doesn't have a standard story arc. There's not really a clear beginning, middle, end, climax, whatever. It's there might be more from an emotional, more visceral standpoint, but it really doesn't follow the typical story arc. And that's by design. It is definitely a very dark look into that kind of person who has run out of earthly pleasures and is seeking just whatever kinds of thrills they can get their hands on. So anyway, dark reading. This is definitely one of those that, um, you know, if you just really want to know this information, it's worth reading. But it's definitely a really depressing story. You'll want to pick up something more light, some good light reading. Have a Far Side cartoon book or something handy when you go through this. So anyway, this is Bret Easton Ellis, Less Than Zero, and this was originally published in, I want to say like 85. Yeah, 1985. So anyway, fascinating book, and the snuff film scene is especially troubling in that. And I find it interesting, if you look at some of the reviews of this book online, some people really bash it for him including that scene. Not because the scene is graphic, but because he gave traction to the snuff film urban legend. So I find that curious. So any of you who've read this, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, but there you go.